Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Friday, January 28th, 2022, and today we're going to be talking about the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, which is focused on re-electing the Democrats in the House of Representatives to another term in 2022, now expanding their list of vulnerable House Democrats in a new announcement, adding to the total number, I think, being 35 Democrats that are in competitive districts for the upcoming midterms. And with 35 races in a competitive nature position, the Democrats are repairing themselves for what is expected to be potentially a midterm defeat. The Democrats don't really have a substantial House majority, and looking at the advantage the Democrats do have, it is a margin of about 5 seats over where it needs to be, which means if the Republican Party was to win just 5 seats from the Democrats in 2022 and kept every single one of their other districts, which is honestly very possible, not a single Republican incumbent lost in 2020, what you will find is that the Republicans will actually win back control of the House of Representatives in 2022. So, seeing just the margin of 5 with the Democrats now expanding their list to 35 really tells you about what type of position that they are in. And in looking at this new announcement, what you will find is that after redistricting has been done and finalized in many of these new states, the Democrats are recognizing where these new competitive districts are going to be found. They point out that Greg Stanton from the state of Arizona will be in a competitive race, that there will be a competitive race in Georgia, in Illinois, in Michigan, in New Jersey, in Ohio, and in Virginia. And they say this because Democrats are now realizing that in the new maps that have been drawn, they aren't going to be as favorable. For instance, one in particular that you saw in the state of Georgia was Sanford Bishop, who was a representative from Georgia's 2nd Congressional District and was previously in a 2nd Congressional District that was leaning towards the Democrats by 6 points more to the left than the rest of the nation. Now, in this new map, the Georgia Republicans decided to shore it up. They decided to make the district less Democratic by taking in a part of Columbus and pushing it up further into the state of Georgia into that 3rd district in an effort to cut it out from a position where the Democrats no longer have a substantial portion of the population, and also just those minute differences really make a big difference, because what you find is that the previous map was D plus 6 and now this new map is D plus 4. While it doesn't seem super consequential, drawing a new competitive district, meaning it is now within 5 percentage points, really matters, especially since races are going to be extremely competitive in 2022. And one thing I do want to say is that this Georgia map never was even fair from the beginning. The Democratic Party only has a possibility at winning 5 out of the 14 districts here, and they really only have a possibility in 2022, at least as of right now, at winning 4 out of the 14, despite them winning the 2 Senate seats and control of the presidency through the state of Georgia. The governorship could very well go in 2022, but for those statewide races, Democrats might have some hope. For the next 10 years, these new Georgia districts probably aren't going to be competitive, which means that it's going to be very difficult for Republicans to end up losing many of these races. But, that's just one particular example of how a previously more solid district was drawn into a more competitive nature and how Democrats are responding to that by acknowledging its new competitive position. Looking at our new House map here, one thing that I do want to say is that the national overview sort of puts us in a position where we aren't seeing many changes from the previous map, which isn't that good of a sign for the Democratic Party. I think it does tell them that in a year like 2018, that it is entirely possible for them to have a majority like this again. After the 2010 redistricting cycle, the Republican Party effectively made it impossible for Democrats to win back control of the House until 2018 after some substantial changes. Now looking at 2020, while Republicans do have the upper hand when it comes down to the process itself in redistricting, Democrats are still ending up to do very well, and the map seems to be very similar to where it was before. You see, Republicans went for the gusto back in 2010. They gerrymandered the House into oblivion, and thus Democrats still continued fighting and were able to win control of it for just 2 to 3 at most 4 years of 2022 goes awry for the Democratic Party. But considering the fact that they went so hard in 2010 in making the districts impossible for Democrats to win, that's their baseline. These new majorities that the Democratic Party has are not necessarily a response of Democrats being unable to win a bunch of these districts, but rather gerrymandered districts that they have been trying to fight on their way upwards. Now, this isn't to say that Democrats didn't gerrymander some states, but Democrats controlled very few states in 2010 after that midterm year where there were a bunch of new governors elected, a new state legislature in many of those states, and they were able to finalize new districts after that data was collected that benefited the GOP, and it benefited them for a very long time. And now Democrats are in a position where, they could turn a map like the one that is being proposed now and finalized now into a map that we have seen in 2018 simply because they are used to the environment. They are used to working against all odds, because if we were being fair about this map, there were occasions where Democrats were losing control of the House, but also winning the popular vote. Even in 2012, what you find when you take a look at the election results is that in 2012, the Democratic Party lost control of the Senate, the House of Representatives, as they did in 2010, but they won the popular vote across the country. So when you find that, all of these districts that the Democratic Party was, winning in, and all the ones that they lost in, you realize that this House map was not at all representative of the nationwide vote, because Democrats did not win here. In 2016, the Democratic Party just lost the House of Representatives vote by 1 percentage point. And what you find here is that Republicans won 241 districts. This only happens with gerrymandering. And it's a House map that the Democrats did substantially better in 2018, despite it being originally formed to not benefit them at all. So the Democrats are not stupid in the way that they acknowledge competitive seats. They are not going to immediately write off many of these seats, and nor are they going to be naive and act as if they are just as Democratic as they were before. But this also does add to this idea that the Democratic Party is gearing up and preparing for a loss in 2022, as they probably should. Seeing the newly added districts here on top of the plenty more before, I think this is 7 additional seats added to the 35 in total, means that Democrats were already preparing for a good amount, 28 districts prior to, that they expected to be extremely competitive, while keeping in mind that they had just 5 seats to spare when it came down to the 2022 map. In fact, just 4 seats. 5 would be enough to put the GOP ahead. And you can see this as, Democrats are looking at a bunch of these retirements. They're looking at a bunch of these new congressional districts that are being drawn, and they're looking at a brand new type of electorate that they are going to be working for. They also announced their list of offensive races, adding a handful of open or Republican-held seats to its target list, including 3 districts in California and 2 in Colorado. And, this quote is very true. Democrats are facing difficult political prospects in November. Republicans need just 5 seats in the House to recapture control of the lower chamber. And, looking at historical precedent in every election in our modern political history, I think since Carter onwards, we have seen the opposition party always win House control or win seats in the House of Representatives, with the exception of 1994, or was it 1998? One of the two, I believe, actually was 1998, because 1994 had that whole Republican Revolution and a huge significant advancement for the Republicans in the House, with them winning control for the first time in 40 years. So it was 1998 and 2002. And 2002 was a response to President George W. Bush's soaring popularity, not simply, but because of 9/11, that simply removed the Democratic Party's chances at victory, because there was a clear coalition behind the Republican Party and the party that was in office in most of those states, which just so happened to be the Republican Party, as they had just won a presidential election 2 years prior. And seeing the districts here, I think that the Democrats are going to soon realize that it becomes a point where playing defense is much more important than playing offense. For the Democrats in 2022, I think because we are entering in with a new map, that playing offense in some states won't be the worst thing. If this was the same type of map that we were used to back from 2020 moving into 2022, I would say that the Democratic Party probably shouldn't be vying to win more seats when they already are poised to lose a bunch more. You see, spreading your resources too thin could cause the Democratic Party to lose every single swing district, and if you don't think that's possible, just take a look at the 2020 House election results. Even though the Democratic Party might have been able to win the House again, and they were able to hold on to that control that they hadn't had for such a substantial period of time, in looking at the toss of districts, what you will find is that not in a single area amongst the toss-up districts, the Republicans expected to win narrowly. The Republicans expected to win easily columns. The Democrats do not have a single victory. And we can scroll and scroll and scroll, and all you will find is red, 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 and more red. Republican after Republican victory, Republican victory after Republican victory, back to back to back to back. And in the Democratic column, what you will find is that in their columns, you do find Republican victories. 4 right here in a row. You find additional ones, 1 here, 2 more here. When you take a look down, I do not believe Republicans had any surprises when it came down to some of these maps, but some of them were pretty close. What did we just see? A Democrat +4, a Democrat +6. These are districts that are expected to be completely safe, yet Democrats were unable to do well. And keep in mind, this is the same exact map that the Democratic Party was winning the presidential election, was winning control of the Senate, and retained control of the House. I can only imagine how bad Democrats will see this map in 2022. But luckily for them, because they are playing very hardball when it comes down to gerrymandering and it comes down to the redistricting process, Democrats are in a position where they can probably hold on to many of the seats they have right now. Because we are reducing the amount of highly competitive seats, this reduces the opportunities for the GOP in 2022. You can see this in Illinois. You can see this in a bunch of states. In New Mexico, you can see this in Nevada. You can see this in a bunch of these states, California, Oregon, where the Democratic Party has had control over the process or near total control, even through an independent commission, which means that Democrats might not necessarily be losing all of their races or losing in a way that is similar to 2010, where Democrats lost 63 seats, or 2014, where Republicans brought Democrats down to just 188 seats in the House of Representatives. What you might find is that the map is a little bit more similar to 2012, then 2016, then 2014, then 2010. And in seeing the House election results from 2020, one thing that I do want to say is that while this is the first Democratic trifecta since the 2008 election, you also have to realize that there was much more room to fall for the Democrats in 2008 and not so much this time around. Democrats, again, can only afford to lose just 4 seats and still control the majority in the House of Representatives. And also, Democrats had 250 plus seats in 2008, which meant that a 63-seat advancement wasn't as unbelievable or as unpredictable as it might be on this map, simply because there are not that many Democratic districts for the GOP to win. So this new map is probably not going to be adding too many more vulnerable House Democrats to the list. In looking at the remaining states, I do want to say that I probably don't expect many of these districts to change. What you're going to find is that Democrats are going to be pretty well off in the state of New York. They're going to have the same number of competitive districts from Connecticut. They're going to be solid in Rhode Island. They might have one in New Hampshire. In Pennsylvania, it depends on what the courts decide. Ohio, same thing with the courts and the GOP-controlled state legislature and redistricting process and commission. Wisconsin, we will see what happens there. Probably not going to be any new additions to what was already expected in terms of competitive districts, but will be added onto the list because I do not believe they are on there until the process is over. What you have is Minnesota. What you have is the state of Missouri, Tennessee, Alabama, Florida, Louisiana, Kansas, and Washington, and Hawaii. Chances are we aren't going to be seeing some super substantial changes from any of those maps, but only time will tell. So this new announcement that the DCCC is DCCC, just making sure that I said that all correctly, expanding the list of vulnerable House Democrats, yes, it does add to this notion and idea that the Democratic Party is not performing at their peak, and I think that's something that nobody really could argue against. I also think that it is sort of nearing the end in terms of the expansiveness of the list. I don't think we're going to see 50 to 60 to 70 competitive House districts for the Democratic Party. Capping it around 40 to 45 probably isn't the best thing for Democrats for obvious reason, but isn't exactly the worst. It could have been much worse had they not gone to a very far extent when it comes down to gerrymandering, not trying to at all say that that was a good thing, say that was excusable by any way, but in terms of political in terms of the way that they act politically, the Democratic Party is trying to be, in a sense, smart about this. What they are trying to do is reduce Republican representation through forcible means, the same way Republicans are doing to Democrats across a bunch of these states. There is no denying that both parties like to gerrymander, and I'm not here to argue that one party is doing it more than the other. But I am going to say that when it comes down to this House map, the reason why this list probably isn't as long as someone might expect, considering that the national environment is really turning on the Democratic Party. I mean, you're talking about Biden being down 12 points. You're talking about Democrats being down 4 points nationally. I mean, all of these things adding up, and you say the amount of toss-up districts seems to be similar to what it was in 2020. When you talk about, a significant amount, about 35, which you have, 20 to 30 here, and you see that there are 35 for the Democratic Party, you begin to say, why are the parallels starting to form? Why are we starting to see this as just another type of election year like 2020? Maybe a little bit worse for the Democratic Party, but by no means is this some type of 2010, 2014 type of level of competitive districts or in terms of retirements. And one thing that I do want to say is that it is pretty interesting to see how the fact that the Democrats have completely turned around an election that could have gone so much more poorly for them and turned it into a position where they are gearing up for losses, but not a super significant significant amount. I think that seeing these new maps have really affirmed the idea that the Democratic Party is going to play hardball every single chance that they can get. The same thing with the GOP, which, completely reduces the point of representation and really is a threat to our fair democracy when it comes down to total representation. But at the end of the day, it's something that has been proposed in Congress and has not passed. It is something that has been brought up in front of the Supreme Court, and they have not made a decision on it. So if our government won't do it, it's probably not going to get done, and thus those on both sides are going to take advantage of it until it actually is squashed. So this DCCC list, expanding the list, am I surprised? No, it makes sense after these new maps have been confirmed and the way that they know how some of these districts are going to go. Do I expect it to change dramatically in the future? Probably not. These districts are not going to change in heavy fashions. I think that we know how many of these states are going to go, and I don't think Democrats are going to be in for huge shockers like they might have been back in 2010 or in the House elections in 2014. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2022 election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today. Sorry, tomorrow.